The Paul Leslie Hour, helping people tell their stories. And now, your host, Paul Leslie.
Hey, it's me. I'm very honored and happy you're joining us. This is the Paul Leslie Hour, and on this episode, we're welcoming record producer and songwriter Allan Reynolds. He's an inductee of the Musicians Hall of Fame and the Nashville Songwriters Hall of Fame. He's more known as being a producer, but he has written some songs, and they've been recorded by some of the most iconic singers of our time. Allan Reynolds is very associated with Garth Brooks. In fact, the bulk of Garth Brooks' work, the first 8 studio albums, were produced by Allan Reynolds, and a lot of people associate their success and quality with the production that Allan Reynolds did. So before we get Allan Reynolds on the phone, we have a surprise for you. Who would have believed Garth Brooks would be on this show? But what can I say? I'm very grateful. I'm going to ask one question of Garth Brooks. What does Allan Reynolds mean to you?
There's not a bigger question that you could have asked Garth Brooks than what does Allan Reynolds mean to me? Allan Reynolds means everything. Because, we're not only talking a producer here, you're talking a mentor. You're talking a second father for me. And I love my dad. This man was that good. His enthusiasm, his ability to cut through the crap and just go straight to the point is a gift that, I wish I had, but all of us wish we had. He's a strange kind of paradox in the fact that he is the most humble man you'll ever meet, but at the same time, he might be the most confident man I've ever met. And to be confident and be humble is something very rare, and I'm not sure I've seen in more than just him. And with that confidence, it makes you not only want to be on the ship, but you have confidence where the ship is sailing, and the utmost confidence that that ship is going to arrive right where you wanted it. And that was it every time. We'd start an album, started the original Garth Brooks album, and we did the No Fences album pretty much at the same time. And after No Fences and the success that it saw, I thought we were dead in the water. There was no way we could follow it. Allan Reynolds had all the confidence in the world that Rope in the Wind would be even bigger. And when he was right, that gave me the confidence to go on for another 150 years, simply from Allan Reynolds and his belief. They say that faith is what gets you there when you can't see where you're going. And that faith is in Allan Reynolds. And he's a great leader. Everybody that's on the ship with him turns to him and loves his confidence, loves his vision, and follows it. That's a great producer. That's a great mentor, great second father. For me, that's Allan Reynolds.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's a great pleasure to introduce this man. Allan Reynolds is an accomplished record producer. He's produced such artists as Garth Brooks, Don Williams, Crystal Gayle, Emmylou Harris, Mattea. He's also an accomplished songwriter. Reynolds has had songs cut by Johnny Cash, Don Williams, Crystal Gayle, Jerry Lee Lewis, Waylon Jennings, and many others. In 2000, Allan Reynolds was inducted into the Nashville Songwriters Hall of Fame. It's my great honor to say these words. Welcome, songwriter and record producer, Allan Reynolds. How are you, sir?
I'm fine, Paul. And you?
I'm doing good. It's a great pleasure to have you on here.
Well, thank you.
I want to kind of get a little bit of your early history.
Okay.
Most stories are best from the beginning. Where are you from?
I was born in Arkansas, outside of North Little Rock. Basically, I grew up in Memphis. And those are, Memphis is right on the border with Arkansas, so I kind of claim both states.
And what about the music that you loved early on? What were you into?
I've told people that Memphis was really kind of a musical crossroads. So I think I heard everything there. And, I listened through different periods. I remember I guess in junior high school, there was a country station I listened to a lot because I liked the disc jockey, a guy who called himself Sleepy-Eyed John. Then later there was Dewey Phillips with Red Hot and Blue, and that was pop and R&B music. There was a wonderful radio station there, WDIA, that was a black radio station, and I had friends there and loved that music. So, all really kind of all across the spectrum. I heard a lot of different things growing up.
How did your parents feel about your interest in music?
They were okay with it. I look back on that and I'm very grateful. Maybe they just trusted me, but they never said a discouraging word to me about being in the music business. They knew how much I loved music, and it must have just made sense to them.
Now, you were saying that you heard all this music across these different genres, from country music to more early rhythm and rock kind of music. Today, would you say that you have a favorite genre of music?
No, I don't guess I would say that. I mean, if we're talking about the music that's coming out today, I have a harder time finding things I respond to, but I'm an old guy now, so maybe that's part of the problem. But I don't find myself listening to the radio a great deal anymore, except for talk radio. I listen to public radio a lot. And then I've got my trusty iPod, so I can load it with the things that I like, and that's just kind of become my preferred way of listening to music these days.
Well, tell the listeners out there, if they were to do some snooping around on your iPod, what kind of stuff would they find?
It would be kind of like I was describing my growing up. It's a real smorgasbord of music, a lot of different kinds. Then there are some areas that I don't like as well as others, but you'd find a pretty good cross-section of music on my iPod. The generous portion of it would be country, as I've loved it and experienced it. But I'd have to say that contemporary country music, I just don't find myself responding to very much of it.
So what are some of the artists that you would find the most of on there?
Waylon, Jennings, Don Williams, Willie Nelson, Bob Dylan, people like that. Mark Knopfler is a big favorite of mine. Those are some of them.
You have good taste.
Well, thank you.
A lot of people know you as more of a record producer, but you are in the Nashville Songwriters Hall of Fame, and a lot of the songs that you've written, people would know them. But I'm curious, do you think of yourself as more of a record producer in terms of what you've done, or more of a songwriter?
Well, for years I was a songwriter, and I came to Nashville as a songwriter, and that was my focus early on. But even when I was still living in Memphis, I was doing producing. I was working a day job and living in studios a lot at night. And producing is something that always fascinated me. And as a songwriter, one of the things you do after you've written a song you like is to try to make a demonstration recording so you can show it to people and try to interest somebody in recording your songs. And so that naturally gets you into the studio trying to get a good recording of your song. And I always liked that part, so I was always drawn to production. And I think my songwriting years did a lot to inform the production work that I did. So to me, as a producer, songs are everything. The artists that I always followed and admired were artists who brought songs that I liked. And the artists that I really liked, I couldn't wait to hear what songs they were going to bring the next time they put out product. And so it was kind of a natural progression for me to move further into record production. But always my record production has been founded on the search for great songs.
And something I thought was really interesting was listening to some of the recordings that you did where you were the name. You were the recording artist.
Uh-oh.
I enjoyed it. There was a song called Wrong Road Again that I know that Crystal Gayle cut, but I heard your version of it. I thought it was very good.
Well, thank you. When I first was around the music business, I thought I wanted to be a recording artist because that's the most visible thing, and I did a little recording along the way, but thankfully I never had any great success with it, and soon discovered that really wasn't the life for me anyway, and I was a lot happier behind the scenes. But early on, I certainly did try my hand at that.
Would you say the fact that you were on both sides of the microphone, that helped you when it came time to produce another artist?
Yeah, I think it helped a lot. It helped to know, what it felt like to be in front of the mic, and how much little things like how the headphones were set up and other things, so that the artist, can really communicate with what's happening with the band, and that gives you perspective and also experience, knowing the kind of things that would throw you off as a singer. So I think it definitely, I've always felt like that helped me a lot. I think it helped me know a lot of little things about how to help make an artist comfortable in the studio so that they could do their best.
We're joined by Allan Reynolds. I'm hoping you can tell us about the role and the influence that Dickie Lee had in your life.
Well, Dickie is, I might not have ever known about the commercial music business if I hadn't met Dickie. That came about because I had early on, back when I was just out of high school and in college, I had a friend who played bass, and I was asking him one time would he teach me to play bass, because I thought, maybe I'd get some gigs and play in a band, and so I went to his house for one day, and he taught me a few things, and then the next time I went to his house, he said, "Hey, I'm playing in a band, and they're rehearsing out at Memphis State University, and I can't go. Why don't you go in my place?" And I said, "Oh man, I don't know enough to do that." And he said, "That's how you learn. I'll lend you my bass." So I went out to Memphis State and met Dickie Lee, and he was the guy that my friend had been playing bass for. And Dickie was writing songs and wanting to record, and he and I hit it off, and I offered to get a vocal group together to be part of his band, and did that, and we just have been close pals ever since, and still are. And we got to writing songs a lot. We wrote together for years and sang together, and I met Jack Clement through Dickie, because at some point we got ourselves on the label, on Sun Records. And the first time we were going to record, the engineer rode up on his motorcycle and leather jacket and tattoos, and it was Jack Clement. And I was so taken with this guy. And the three of us became lifelong friends. So that's had everything to do with my having a place and finding a place in the music business.
I'm hoping you can tell us a little bit more about Jack Clement, Cowboy Jack.
Well, Jack was one of the most interesting people I ever met, and immensely talented, but also really fun-loving, a lighthearted guy. We laughed a lot together, he and Dickie and I did, and he was sort of my role model in the early years, because he was Dickie was the first songwriter I met, and Jack was one of the next successful songwriters I met, and listening to his songs and being a fan of his work certainly had an influence on me. And he never told me how to write or do anything, but he was there as a sounding board, and he was hard to impress. and I think that was good for me. You know, it made me dig harder and try harder and trying to write some kind of song that would impress him. Because if you wrote a song that didn't impress him, all you'd get out of him was a yeah. And I wanted to get a yeah. So that was a big influence on me. And Jack, was a man of all trades. He was a songwriter, publisher, record producer. Could have been a successful artist if he ever really put his focus on that. But one of my dearest friends.
Who would you say taught you the most about record producing?
I would guess I learned the most from being able to watch Jack at work, and that is a great privilege sometimes to just be allowed to be a fly on the wall while things are going on. So I would watch him, and I didn't always understand what he was doing or agree with him, but you learn from that too. You know, it helps you form your own opinion. But I think Jack and I had a lot in common when it came to our appraisal of songs. He had a real nose for what was real and what was phony. I remember he laughed one time and said, "I'm not a phony." He said, "I may be an old frog, but I'm not a phony." And he really had a low tolerance for, and so did Sam Phillips, had a very low tolerance for music that was too phony and crafted and too cute, and he had an ear for the real thing, and I think that exposure to that standard markedly influenced me.
What would you say makes for a good producer? What are the qualities?
That's kind of hard to say. I mean, as a producer, you sort of do whatever you can think to do to help the artist present themselves and the music that they have. You help them in the process of selecting the music, and that's probably one of the most fundamental, important things you do. And then you just try to make a comfortable environment for everybody so that they can hear each other well and communicate well, and then you interfere with that process as little as possible, and do your best to kind of steer the creativity and help people listen to what they're doing. And if you do that, then they'll find the path, Those are some of the qualities that I think are important in a producer. The producer really is kind of, you're sort of the person in between the record company. The record companies are not creative at all. They manufacture and distribute, sell the product, and basically they're usually a bad influence on the whole process. But you are responsible to the record label, you're responsible for the budget and all of that, but you're really the third ear for the artist, helping find an attractive way to frame a song and frame their performance and help them listen to and evaluate their own performance and get that magic, And then as a producer, you have to be able to recognize it when magic has happened. And I think I was fairly good at that, because sometimes you can get locked into trying too hard in the studio, and you can have it and not realize you do, and you can go past the point. Anyway, I love production, and it was I always called it my favorite puzzle.
There's a couple of your songs I want to ask you about writing and kind of their influence. The first one being 5 O'Clock World.
Yeah, I at that time I was managing a branch bank it was First National Bank at the time. It's First Tennessee now, I think, but in Memphis. And I was moonlighting the music, and so that song came right out of my life. I would put in my day's work, and in fact, I would put in my day's work and then often be working in the studio, sometimes until the sun came up the next day, and then still be at my desk at 8 o'clock. So 5 O'Clock World was pretty autobiographical, and it came to me first as a melody, and I liked it, and came home from work one day, and the words just started coming. And so that's kind of how that song was born. At the time, I was writing for Screen Gems, which their head office was in New York, but they had an office in Nashville. Dickie Lee and I were both writing for them, and we would write up a batch of songs and come up to Nashville and make demonstration recordings, and then they would pedal them and try to get recordings. And 5 O'Clock World, when we came up and recorded the demo for that, and it ended up being pitched to this small independent label up in Pittsburgh, I think. It was called Co&C Records, and they tried to record it with their group, but didn't feel like they caught the magic, and asked my publisher if they could have the track that we had recorded in Nashville. So the publisher agreed to that. The label up there paid the musicians again, and used my track, took my voice off and put theirs on, and added some strings, I think, and basically the record was cut here in Nashville. But I always liked that song because it kind of came from a real place.
I like that song a lot, too. And when I was doing research for this interview, I said, oh, man, I had no idea you wrote that song.
Yeah, that really helped tide me over spiritually, I guess. It didn't make me near as much money as I thought it might, but it was a big success, and it helped me believe that I could do it. And like I say, at the time, I was working for the bank and moonlighting the music, so it was a real kick for me to have that success at that time.
The other song I wanted to ask you about, the song that you co-wrote with Bob McDill, Catfish John.
That was written when like Jack Clement had decided to start a record label, and he wanted me to manage it for some reason. And one of the first things I did was I asked Bob to make an album, because I always really liked his singing and I loved his writing. So he started work on the album, and sometime during that period, he wanted to get together with me and write some songs, and we wrote 5 or 6, several of which became part of the album that he did. And then Bob went on to a very distinguished career as a songwriter and did not pursue being an artist, but Catfish John was first recorded by Bob for his album for that little independent record label. Bob and I were readers and talked a lot. When we get together to write, we spent a lot of time just chatting about things, and we were fascinated with the Mississippi River Delta and the music it had produced. And we talked a lot about that and about the South and the music that had come from the South. And Catfish John really was about, not about a specific person, but about kind of an amalgam of people we had known, black people that we had known. So the idea of Catfish John came from that. And that's another song that I always enjoyed.
So what was it like for you to be inducted into the Nashville Songwriters Hall of Fame?
It was amazing. I was totally surprised. I didn't expect it a bit, and it still is a thrill for me to imagine my name alongside others in that Hall of Fame. I mean, some of my big heroes, Harlan Howard and people like that, Jack Clement. Even Irving Berlin, I think, is a member of that Hall of Fame. One of my biggest heroes.
You know, I didn't ask you this at the beginning, but I was just curious. And now that you bring this up, I wanted to know if you were a lover of the Tin Pan Alley, the early American songbook.
Oh, yeah. And I got a lot of exposure to that as a kid from my parents. Plus, there was just, when I was a kid, there was a lot of that music still around. And the American Songbook is pretty amazing. And Irving Berlin is, you couldn't find a better role model for melodies and for clean, clear lyrics. Just amazing poetry.
I have to agree with you there. One of the few songwriters in history that his lyrics were as strong as his melodies.
Yeah, and that's another thing I'm very fond of is melodies. I've always been, as a producer, I told people that if the song didn't pull me in musically, I didn't much care what it said. And that's, as I was looking for songs and listening for songs, melody was always important to me. Today, I don't hear much melody. It's more rapping or chanting. And that's one of the reasons I think I have a hard time with today's offerings.
We mentioned a couple of the people that you've written songs with, the co-writers, Bob McDill, Dickie Lee. Would it be possible to pick a favorite songwriting partner?
I'd be hard-pressed to pick an absolute favorite. I loved writing with both those guys, and I did a little bit of co-writing with other people. Basically, I didn't co-write a whole lot beyond those two guys. I probably wrote maybe a couple of songs with Jack Lemmett and the odd song here and there with someone else. I wrote some songs with a girl named Susan Taylor, who was Don Williams' partner in the original Pozo Seco Singers before Don went solo.
What was her name again? I'm sorry.
Susan Taylor.
Susan Taylor, okay.
Yeah, she was the voice on they had a big recording called Time that was the Pozo Seco Singers, and I remember the first time I heard that record, I pulled over to the side of the road. It just knocked me out, and I always loved her voice, and after I moved here, I met her and actually produced an album on her for Jack's label. So I've always had fun writing with her, but basically I just didn't co-write a lot. But the people we're talking about, I've had great times writing with them. Bob McDill, there was a time in the early years of my being in Nashville, and I guess in the last year that I was in Memphis, that Bob and I wrote kind of on a regular basis, and it was great. Like I say, we both like to read, and we talk about books as much as we would songs. So it was always fun to get together with him, and I always liked what we came up with. There's a song that Bob and I wrote called I Recall a Gypsy Woman that Waylon Jennings recorded, and I just love that song. I never would have written it alone. Don't know if he would have written it alone. Beyond those few people, I just never did a whole lot of co-writing.
At the beginning of the interview, when you were talking about the artists that you listened to, what you would find in your trusty iPod, one of them, I think, was just one of the great singers of our time, and that would be the late Don Williams. Tell us about meeting him.
I met him when the Pozo Secos were still together, and Dickie Lee and I went over to meet him and pitched him a song written by Bob McDill, which they recorded on the last album they did together. And then after that, the album didn't do much, and he and Susan disbanded, and Don moved back to Texas and went into the furniture business with his father-in-law. So then meanwhile, Jack started his record label, and I talked to Susan Taylor, wanting her to let me do an album on her, and she was a little reluctant at first because she was kind of burned out with the business, but finally she agreed, and we started an album. And somewhere along the way, as we were doing that, she said she had heard from Donnie, as she called him, and he was unhappy in the furniture business in Texas and was going to come to town at some point, and she wanted me to have dinner with him when he came because she thought we'd like each other. And I said, okay. So when Don came, we did have dinner and we did like each other, and he said he was wanting to, try to get back to the music business, and he thought it'd probably be 6 months or so before he back. And I said, well, when you do that, if you decide to do that, when you do, give me a shout and we'll see if we can work something out. And it probably was not a month later. I got a phone call and he was here with his family and kids in a U-Haul truck. That was ahead of my schedule, but we got together and I ended up hiring him to work for Jack's publishing company and be a songwriter for that company, and told him that we would record him a little further down the road. And so time went by. I finished Susan's album, and Don seemed happy, and he was writing songs, and I was liking what he was doing. And then one day he said, well, Reynolds, when are we going to start recording me? And I said, well, I guess right away. So we started work on his album, and it was so much fun. I mean, Don and I were like brothers back in those days. And doing that first album was huge fun. It was like unwrapping a present. That beautiful voice of his and the song sensibility that he had. And we with thanks to Jack Clement, we found a wonderful rhythm section to back him up. And Don, once that album came out, he very quickly became a star. And that album still sounds beautiful to me today. And it had some classic hits of his on it. Amanda, for one thing, Bob McDill song, and Come Early Morning, another Bob McDill song, The Shelter of Your Eyes, the song that Don wrote. And Don was really a neat person and had a voice that had this richness about it. A lot of people may have a richness in a certain register, but if they move up to a higher register, their voice will thin out. And Don's didn't do that. It kept that texture and richness no matter what key he was in. So we did 2 albums, his first 2 albums, and then we quit working together. Finally got back together, maybe 15, 20 years later, and did, or longer, and did another album. But he was, just an artist that I really always appreciated, and some of his recordings are among my favorites. And Bob McDill was one of his primary songwriters, and together they did some memorable work. Most of all, Good Old Boys Like Me, which I think is one of the best songs and one of the best recordings I ever heard.
We're joined by record producer and songwriter Allan Reynolds. I'm hoping you can share with us a little bit about your time working in the studio with Crystal Gayle. There were some great, great songs made that you produced.
Thank you. Yeah, Crystal and I worked together for 9 or 10 years, and it was one of the sweetest collaborations I've had in my career. And part of it, I think, was for me, she was such a good singer, and she's also just a really delightful person. So it was great working with her, and I think we had a lot. Our taste in songs, we had a lot in common when it came to that. So we got to try a pretty broad range of music with her, and she impressed me again and again. She's just a very intuitive singer. It's a natural.
What about your time with Kathy Mattea?
Well, that was great too. That came along in the mid-'80s during a time when I had just almost sold my recording studio and went back to songwriting, and because I was not very happy with the direction of things at that time, and then I had an epiphany and decided I was not going to sell my studio, that I was going to stay there and make the best music I could, whether anybody wanted it or not. And soon after I made that resolve, I got a phone call about this young artist named Mattea, and got together and we liked each other and decided to work together. And it was successful for her, but it also really renewed my spirit and got me back into having fun with producing music. So I owe her a lot for that experience too. It was a lot of fun. Kathy comes from a little more to the folky side of country, and I guess in a way so do I. And so we found some great songs and had a really good time.
With Garth Brooks, when you met him, when you first encountered him, was there any kind of feeling that you had or any kind of thought that you had that this is going to be a very successful recording artist?
Not when we first met. Before we met, I had met with his manager who had played me a bunch of Garth songs and demos, so I heard Garth singing a bunch of his songs, and I really did like what I heard. And I guess probably a month before that, I had said to my engineer, Kathy's career is really getting legs under it now, and I wish I could I'd love to find a male singer that I could have as much fun with as I've been having with Kathy. And it was probably a month later or so that his manager called me, and he said, I don't know if you're looking for anybody. And I said, well, I'm not looking, but I'm open. And he said, well, I hear that. So we got together, and he played me a lot of this music, and I liked it. So I said, well, let's the three of us get together. And we did, and I liked Garth, but he was pretty reserved, pretty quiet. I did with him what I was in the habit of doing with someone that I had met like that. And I said, I like what I hear. I like what you're saying to me. What I propose is that we do a couple of recording sessions together and see how we work together, because this is an important connection for you. You need to make sure you're hooking up with somebody that you're going to be productive with, and I don't want to get hooked up with somebody that I don't enjoy. So let's do a couple of sessions, and then we'll look at it, and if we feel good about it, then we'll go ahead, and if we don't, then all you got to do is say, well, thanks, but quite what I'm looking for, and we'll part as friends. And so we did that. We did 2 sessions, and we cut 4 songs, and a couple of them were number 1 records down the road. But as we worked together, I was very impressed with him, and my admiration grew pretty quickly. And then after we finished, I sat down with him like a Dutch uncle and talked to him and said, I think this album is going to get you way down the road, and this is the start of your career, and you need to make sure you always remember it's your career and make choices accordingly. And I talked to him about, hiring good people and all that kind of stuff, all things that I didn't need to say because he was way ahead of me. And he already knew all of that stuff, I think. And, once that album came out, his career really started taking off because he's so magical in person. So by the time we were done with that first album, I thought he was going to do well, but I had no idea he was going to do so well. I don't think anybody saw that.
Why do you suppose he has done so well? What do you think it is that the Garth magic?
Well, I have to go back to my fundamental, which first of all is songs. I think he brought great songs to the table, and I think he had a lot of wisdom about that aspect because Garth's a good songwriter, and when we met, he had a whole basket full of good songs that he'd been writing. And but on that first album, he didn't want his name on more than half of the songs. And he said, that's my limit. He said, I hope that I can write well enough to be competitive and have some of my songs on the album, but I don't want more than half of the songs to have my name on them, because I don't want to send that message to the songwriting community that I'm going to just do what I write, because I'm going to need them, and I want them to know that I'm open. And I thought that was great wisdom for a newcomer. And so he proved that to me, because we had cut 10 songs and decided one of them didn't suit us. And we were looking for that 10th song, and I brought up several songs that he already had that had his name on them, and he wouldn't touch them. We later recorded them, but he wouldn't touch them for that first album because he didn't want his name on more than half. And I think that had a great deal to do with his success. And so that's the fundamental. And then beyond that, it's just Garth. He's a real solid human being. He loves what he does. He loves people. And I've never knew any artist who was so unconflicted about being an artist. A lot of artists are happy to be an artist and happy to be popular, but they wrestle with the side effects of popularity. And Garth, I never detected anything like that with him. He just handled it like he was born to do it. And I never saw an artist have more fun on stage than he does. And that just shows. I mean, people pick up on that. They know when you're real and when you're not. So I don't know. I credit those things a whole lot with his success. But, you know, the it factor is something nobody can explain. He has it. Right away, he knew what he wanted to do. He knew what kind of show he wanted to put on. He knew what kind of staging and what kind of band. And he was like fully formed almost. Once we got through with that first album, it just took off. I've never seen anything like it.
Of the albums that you produced with Garth, could you pick a favorite or the one that you think was the best?
No, I couldn't pick a favorite. I could pick some, but among the favorites would be The Dance, which I think is just an amazing song. And, that's a song we wouldn't have had if Garth had been wanting to record only songs that he had his name on. And, but he was at a club called the Bluebird and heard the songwriter sing that song with his guitar, and Garth's reaction was, "Oh my God, did anyone else hear what I just heard?" And afterwards, he struck up a conversation with that songwriter, Tony Arata, and asked if he could have a copy of the song, told him how much he loved it. And then, as we were working on his first album, at some point, we're listening to songs together, and at some point, he says to me, he's got a bunch of songs that he's collected over the last year or so, and I said, well, I'll be glad to listen through those with you anytime you want to. So the next time we got together, he brought in this box top lid that had a mound of cassettes on it, and said, you said you wouldn't mind listening, here they are. And I took them home, and among them, there were some really good songs, and several that we ended up recording in time, but there was one song, The Dance, that just knocked me over, because it was this beautiful economic little poem that had so many different levels of meaning. So the next time we got together, I asked him about that song, and I said, how do you feel about that song? He said, I like it. I said, well, how much do you like it? You like it a lot? He said, I love it. And I said, well, if you love it, I think we ought to record it. And we did, and as you know, it's just a real clean, simple recording. It has just a simple little rhythm section and a string quartet. It's so powerful. I can hear it now and get chill bumps from it. And it's been a mainstay for him for his whole career, still is. So that one would certainly be one that I would name. And it's one, as I say, that we would never have had if he had not been open to the work of other songwriters. Another example of that is Friends in Low Places, which he did not write. Another example is Two of a Kind working on A Full House, which he did not write. So, I offer that up as a wisdom tip for any would-be recording artists. Never take the mindset that you want to write everything. Always try to be open to the possibility that someone out there might write something that you would just die to have your name on it. So anyway, that's kind of where I'm with favorites. There's a number of, I liked most everything we did. There's probably only one or two that I have had a little less enthusiasm for. And the deal that I asked for from Garth and Kathy and Crystal and everybody that I've ever worked with is, let's look real hard for songs and put our back into that effort. And if either one of us, let both of us listen and bring songs to the listening session and talk about them. And if either one of us has a problem with a song, then let's put it aside and we can bring it up again next time we get together or the next time. But let's look for songs that we both feel strong about. And that's kind of the way we worked.
It's called Allentown now, but I'm hoping you can tell us about where so many of these great songs were recorded. Jack's Tracks, it was called then, Jack's Tracks Recording Studio. And there have been a few guests on this show who've talked about it. Bonita Hill, who mentioned that the doors were closed and that there was no photos to be taken.
Right.
What was that about?
Well, it was, first of all, the place was, Jack Clement owned the building initially, and initially he had an art and photography studio there, and then he moved that, and when he did, I was pestering him to open to put in an in-house studio for the songwriters to work in and play in, and because at that time we had an extra recording console, so he did that. I named it Jack's Tracks because it was Jack Clement that owned it, and it was a 16-track studio. And then a few years later, I bought it from Jack and kept the name, and then that became the place where I did all my work after that. And I made that place as best I could. I made it a refuge for artists and songwriters, and I did my best to keep record labels out of there and keep the business, part of the business, away from the place and make it just a nice creative haven. I didn't have a sign outside, and I didn't want any outside business. I didn't rent it out to anyone. I did let Jim Rooney do some wonderful work there because he's my buddy and I loved the music that he brought there. So he did a lot of work with Nancy Griffith there and John Prine and Iris DeMent and artists like that. And I was happy enough to have him there, but basically I didn't want outside clients because it was my workspace and I wanted it to be ready for me when I wanted to use it. So that way it was there for me, like if a recording session was coming up and the artist and I were looking for songs, then after we had a batch of songs, the first thing I would do would be to get the artist to come in and we'd just have a guitar player and we would make work tapes of the songs we were considering. And it's amazing. It's such a simple, inexpensive thing to do, and it was one of the most effective tools as a producer that I ever had, because you get to hear the artist sing the song, they get to hear themselves and work out with it a little bit, and you get to figure out what key sounds best, and And you can tell pretty quickly whether it's a good song for that artist or just a good song, but not that great for the artist in question. So by having my own studio available there, it was easy to do that. And I never had to, it made scheduling easy. If I wanted a certain musician, all I had to do is ask, when are you available? Because my studio was already available. So it was a great production tool. It was not a moneymaker. It was a workshop, and served me well that way. And then when I was finished and decided I was retiring, I sold it to Garth Brooks, I'm happy to say. And so it's still a musical place, and that makes me happy. But it was a sweet place. It was always a sweet energy there.
How did you feel when you found out it was going to be called Allentown?
Well, I was pretty blown away by that. It was a sweet gesture on his part.
What would you say is the best thing about being Allan Reynolds?
Oh my! Well, I don't know where to start. It's like every day I get up and count my blessings, and I always did. And I think of myself as one of the luckiest people ever. The timing of my life when I came along and first got acquainted with the music business, it was a beautiful time. And the years in Nashville were some of the finest years ever for a songwriter, artist, producer, music maker. It was just wonderful, and I got to know my heroes. I got to know Harlan Howard and Chet Atkins and Owen Bradley and on, Bobby Bare and Waylon Jennings and on. Artists that I admired so much, musicians that I can't believe. I mean, I've told people for years that Nashville was rich, and I didn't mean money. I meant the talent that was drawn here and the world-class musicians that I got to work with. That I'm still just stunned at the caliber of talent that I got to know and work with. It just boggles my mind. So those are some of the best things professionally about being Allan Reynolds. Beyond that, I've got great kids and grandkids, and I feel like I've had a storybook life. It doesn't mean I didn't work hard. It didn't just fall in my lap, but it happened, and I don't know why.
We had these labels that we applied to you: record producer, songwriter, inductee of the Nashville Songwriters Hall of Fame. Who would you say Allan Reynolds is at heart?
Gosh, I don't know how to answer that. I'm a music lover at heart, and I'm so grateful I got to be in that game as a professional and have a place among all these people whose talent I admire so much. And other than that, I'm just a journeyman who, for some reason, got dropped into this place at such a choice time.
I saw again and again where people would refer to you as Songman.
That's a compliment.
Well, I have to say, after talking to you this last hour, you went back again and again and again to how important songs are.
Yeah, I think they're everything. Maggie Cavender, who founded the Nashville Songwriters Association, also gave them their motto or their byword, which is, it all begins with a song. And that's been my touchstone, as I've said, all the way through. And other than that, it's not rocket science. It's just trying to have fun and communicate with the world musically. That takes a good song.
Our guest on this episode of the Paul Leslie Hour has been Allan Reynolds. I always like to let the guest at the very end just take the microphone. You can go anywhere you want, totally open-ended. My last question, what would you say to anyone listening?
Gosh, I would say music matters, and it's one of our best forms of communication. It's healing, it's challenging, it just means so much. It's, as any business, it's as subject to corruption as anything else we love. And if you ever want to be a part of the music business, then you should try to make the music as good as you can make it at all times, and that's good business. And if you want to be in the music industry, bring it your best.
Well, Mr. Reynolds, thank you very much for sharing with us.
Well, it's been my pleasure. It's nice meeting you, Paul. I wish you the best.
Well, I've enjoyed talking to you. Thank you so much.
I appreciate you and those who do what you do, and especially those who have some measure of freedom in what they do and get to try to present good music for people. Over the course of my life, radio has gotten so corporate that it's not not even close to the entity it was when I was young. I'm with you. You mentioned in your letter to me, I think it's a very creative, potentially a very creative industry, and in my best experiences with radio, they were as much involved in giving people the music they need as the people who created the music. And I hope you have and continue to have a lot of freedom in what you bring.
Well, I appreciate that, and there's less and less places for people like me on the radio.
No, I know it. I miss that. I mean, I truly miss that. It was. I knew in my early years, I knew a lot of radio people and liked them, and they were able to do their own programming. It was a wonderful time.
I thought it was kind of interesting. You were mentioning the artists that were on your iPod at the beginning.
Uh-huh.
And here I am, a guy born in the 80s, and we're listening to the same artists.
Are we?
Those are the same people. If you click on most listened to artists, it's Willie Nelson, it's Don Williams, it's that kind of stuff.
Yeah, well, that's great.
Not what's on the radio now.
No, I know. I believe in my heart there's still a big audience for that. You know, with in my days working with Crystal Gayle, people that were not country music fans I'd play something for them that I had done with Crystal, and I'd get reactions like, "Is that country music? I like that."
Mm-hmm.
And I would think, well, damn. Yeah. Well, I think actually some of the streaming is actually opening up ears. I've had some friends tell me they have Spotify or that kind of thing for their kids, and their kids are finding and listening to music like all across the board, like from the 30s and 40s, as well as contemporary things, and to the delight of their parents. You know, maybe we'll not get too locked down to the top 40.
Well, sir, I hope you have a wonderful rest of the day and a wonderful rest of the weekend.
Well, thanks, Paul, and good luck to you.
All right, you too. Happy trails.
Okay, you too. Bye-bye.
Ladies and gentlemen, that was Allan Reynolds. I want to thank Allan Reynolds for being our special guest and giving us such an in-depth and insightful interview. I would also like to add, everybody, tomorrow is Allan Reynolds' birthday. Happy birthday, Mr. Reynolds. I have to give thanks to Benita Hill. I had a dream of doing this interview, and she encouraged me to try and make it a reality. Of course, thank you to Garth Brooks for joining us and answering my question of what does Allan Reynolds mean to you? My utmost gratitude and appreciation go to the recording engineers, Matthew Buster Allen of Allen Sound, and special thanks to Jeff Pike for editing and mastering the Allan Reynolds interview. I also want to thank Nancy Seltzer for her assistance. I really can't thank you enough. Credit is due to Jeff Pike for composing and performing the Paul Leslie Hour theme song. We also used the John Goodwin song Born Blue in this episode. Well, everybody, if you haven't subscribed to the Paul Leslie Hour, I encourage you to do so. It's completely free. It's my mission to help people tell their stories. I'm honored that people trust me enough to do so. That's all I've got. Until next time.